Welcome. You're always trying to, cut through the noise and really get to what matters.
Absolutely.
Well, lately, hydrogen power for cars. It's been buzzing around a lot. Promises clean transport.
Sounds amazing on the surface.
Yeah, cars just emitting water. Sounds fantastic. But is it really that straightforward? We've really dug into our sources here to give you the straight facts.
Mm-hmm.
Our mission today really is to figure out where hydrogen fuel for cars actually stands.
Mm-hmm.
Separate the real potential from the wishful thinking.
Exactly. And for listeners who want to get a solid handle on complex stuff quickly, this deep dive should be perfect. We've waded through the complexities.
So they don't have to.
Pretty much. Aiming for a clear picture without getting totally bogged down in excessive jargon.
Right. And that brings us to the big question, I think. If these hydrogen cars are so clean, just producing water, why aren't they? Well, everywhere.
It seems like a no-brainer, doesn't it?
Yeah. But I suspect, and as we'll find out, there are some maybe surprising layers and trade-offs involved.
Okay.
So let's start at the beginning. What is hydrogen?
Right. Basics first. Hydrogen is, at its core, the simplest and most abundant element in the whole universe.
Like number one on the periodic table.
That's the one. Atomic number 1, symbol H. Just one proton, one electron, super light. But the key thing, here on Earth anyway, is that pure hydrogen gas is actually quite rare.
Oh, right. Because it reacts easily.
Exactly. It's almost always tied up in compounds, most famously water, H2O, obviously, but also in things like natural gas, methane, biomass.
So it's everywhere, but not free. We need energy to get it out.
Precisely. It's not really a primary energy source like, say, solar or wind. It's more of an energy carrier. You put energy in to extract it, and then you get energy back when you use it.
Okay, that makes sense. So we can't just, mine for hydrogen gas.
Yeah.
Which brings up something I've definitely heard. This idea of cars that run on water.
Ah, yes, the water-fueled car.
Is there any truth to that? Are we going to be filling up our tanks with a garden hose?
Well, that specific idea is basically a myth. Cars don't run directly on water. Hydrogen cars, or FCEVs, fuel cell electric vehicles, they have tanks on board.
Tanks of hydrogen gas.
Compressed hydrogen gas, yeah. Now, where water does come in, you can make hydrogen from water using a process called electrolysis.
That's splitting water with electricity.
Exactly. You use electricity to split H2O into hydrogen and oxygen. And then crucially, when the FCEV uses that stored hydrogen in its fuel cell,
It generates electricity for the motor.
right, and the only thing that comes out the tailpipe is water vapor. So water is often the source for the hydrogen, and it's the output from the car. But the actual fuel inside the car is that stored hydrogen gas.
Got it. So water in at the start of the process, hydrogen is the middleman fuel, water out at the end. Okay.
Yeah.
So how do we actually get that hydrogen from water or natural gas or whatever? What are the main ways?
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting and also kind of complicated, especially for the environment. The main method today, by far, around 98% globally back in 2019, is called steam methane reforming, SMR.
Steam methane. So that uses natural gas.
Yep. You react natural gas, which is mostly methane, with high temperature steam that gives you hydrogen, but it also produces carbon dioxide, CO2.
Ah. So not so clean then.
Not inherently, no. That's the big challenge with standard SMR. It releases quite a bit of CO2 unless you add technology to capture that carbon.
Which costs more, I assume.
Generally, yes. The other main production route is electrolysis, which we just mentioned, splitting water with electricity.
And the big advantage there is
Potential for zero emissions. If the electricity you use comes from renewable sources, like wind power or solar, then the whole process, making the hydrogen, is clean.
okay, so SMR is dominant but dirty. Electrolysis can be clean but needs clean electricity. Are there other ways?
There are a few less common ones. Things like biomass gasification, turning organic stuff into gas, including hydrogen and thermochemical processes using heat. But they face challenges with cost and scaling up right now.
And I keep hearing about hydrogen having colors. Gray, blue, green. What's that about? Is it just jargon?
It's actually a pretty useful shorthand. It tells you about the environmental impact of how the hydrogen was made.
Okay, break it down for me.
So gray hydrogen, that's your standard SMR, natural gas in, hydrogen and CO2 out, with the CO2 just released. Big carbon footprint.
Got it. The default but polluting one.
Exactly. Then there's blue hydrogen. That's also SMR from natural gas, but you use carbon capture and storage CCS technology.
So you capture the CO2 instead of releasing it.
Right. You capture it and store it, usually underground. This reduces the emissions significantly compared to gray, but It's not always perfect. There can be leakage, and the CCS process itself uses energy, so lower emissions, but not zero.
Better, but not perfect.
Yeah.
And green.
Green hydrogen is the gold standard, environmentally speaking. That's hydrogen made via electrolysis, only using electricity from renewable sources. Wind, solar, hydro.
So truly zero emissions in production.
Essentially, yes. But, and it's a big but, it's currently more expensive to produce. You need cheap renewable electricity and efficient electrolyzers, and we're still scaling that up.
Right. So the color really matters. A zero-emission hydrogen car running on gray hydrogen isn't really zero emission overall.
Precisely. The well-to-wheels emissions depend hugely on that production step. That's a critical point many people miss.
Okay, that color coding helps a lot. Now, shifting gears slightly, safety. That's another big one people bring up. Hydrogen. It's flammable, right? Isn't it dangerous?
It is flammable, yes. And safety is absolutely a top priority. Hydrogen does have properties that need careful management. It ignites very easily, low ignition energy, and it burns across a very wide range of concentrations in air.
Wider than gasoline.
Much wider. Plus, it can make certain metals brittle over time, which is called embrittlement. So, yeah, the risks of leaks, fires, material failure, they're real considerations.
Okay, that sounds a bit scary. What are they doing to make these cars safe then?
A lot, actually. The engineering is quite advanced. First off, those hydrogen storage decks in the cars, they are incredibly robust, usually high-pressure cylinders, designed to handle pressures up to 700 bar.
700 bar. How high is that?
Think scuba tank pressure, then multiply it several times. They undergo rigorous testing, crash tests, bonfire tests, even gunfire tests. They're built tough.
Oh, okay.
There's also research into other storage methods like cryogenic liquid hydrogen or advanced materials, metal hydrides, MOFs, that might store hydrogen at lower pressures in the future. But the high-pressure tanks are the standard now.
And beyond the tank itself.
Oh, yeah. The cars have sophisticated sensors everywhere to detect any potential leaks immediately. And there are strict industry standards and protocols from groups like the National Fire Protection Association, governing everything from tank design to refueling procedures.
So how does it stack up against gasoline safety, something we're used to?
It's a different set of risks, really. Hydrogen is much lighter than air, so if it leaks, it tends to disperse upwards very quickly, unlike gasoline vapor, which can pool near the ground. That rapid dispersal can be a safety advantage in some scenarios.
But
But hydrogen flames are nearly invisible in daylight, and as we said, it ignites very easily. So leak detection is absolutely critical. Both fuels demand respect and careful engineering, just in different ways. The bottom line is, with the current safety measures, hydrogen can be handled and used safely.
okay, that's reassuring. It sounds like a lot of thought has gone into managing the risks. So let's peek under the hood, so to speak. How does a hydrogen car actually work? What makes it go?
Right. The heart of an FCEV is the fuel cell stack. You can sort of think of it like a battery that doesn't run down as long as you keep feeding it fuel.
Fuel being hydrogen.
Hydrogen from the tank and oxygen, which it just pulls from the ambient air. Inside the fuel cell, often a PEM type, polymer electrolyte membrane, there's an electrochemical reaction, not burning, like in an engine.
Okay, a chemical reaction.
Yeah, it combines the hydrogen and oxygen, and that reaction produces electricity, heat, and water.
Just water.
Just water vapor as the emission. That electricity then powers an electric motor, and the motor drives the wheels. Very similar to how a battery electric vehicle works downstream from the power source.
And they usually have a small battery too, right?
They do, yeah. It's typically much smaller than in a full battery EV. It captures energy from regenerative braking and provides a boost for acceleration when you need quick power. It smooths things out.
So totally different from my gasoline car's engine. No combustion, no pistons flying around.
Exactly. A gasoline car uses an internal combustion engine, ICE, controlled explosions, basically to create mechanical power. An FCEV generates electricity chemically and uses an electric motor. Cleaner, quieter, often more efficient.
You mentioned FCEVs. Are there other types of hydrogen cars?
Well, there's a less common type called a hydrogen internal combustion engine vehicle, or HICEV. It basically burns hydrogen in a modified piston engine, like a gasoline engine.
Why isn't that more popular?
It's generally less efficient than a fuel cell, and it can still produce some minor emissions like nitrogen oxides, though no CO2. FCEVs are really seen as the main path forward for hydrogen passenger cars.
Okay. And what about converting? Could I take my old gas guzzler and make it a hydrogen car?
The conversion question. Theoretically, maybe, but practically, it's incredibly complex and expensive, not really feasible for most people or cars.
Why not? What's involved?
For an FCEV conversion, you'd need to rip out the engine, the fuel tank, the exhaust, basically the whole powertrain. Then you'd have to install the hydrogen tanks, which are bulky and need secure mounting, the fuel cell stack, the electric motor, the power electronics, the cooling systems.
Sounds like building a new car almost.
Pretty much. The car's chassis might not even be suitable to safely hold the high-pressure tanks, and converting to an HIC also requires significant engine modifications and the whole fuel storage system. It just doesn't make economic sense compared to vehicles designed as hydrogen cars from the start.
Right. Okay. Not a weekend garage project then.
Yeah.
So we understand the tech a bit better now. Let's try and balance this out. What are the clear pros of using hydrogen in cars?
Okay. Advantages. The big one, number one, is zero tailpipe emissions. Just water vapor, huge for air quality, especially in cities.
Definitely. What else?
Efficiency. Fuel cells are generally more efficient at converting fuel energy into power than internal combustion engines. Then there's refueling time. You can fill up a hydrogen tank in, say, 3 to 5 minutes. That's very similar to filling up with gasoline.
And much faster than charging most EVs currently.
Exactly. That's a major convenience factor for many people. And related to that is range. FCEVs typically offer driving ranges of over 300 miles, sometimes quite a bit more, comparable to gasoline cars and often exceeding many current BEVs.
Okay, quick refueling, long range. Any others?
Well, hydrogen has a very high energy density by weight, meaning for a certain amount of weight, it stores a lot of energy, more than current batteries, though batteries are improving.
Okay, those are compelling points. Zero emissions, efficient, fast refueling, long range. So what are the catches? The big cons?
Well, we touched on one already, the production emissions. While the car itself is clean, if you're making the hydrogen from natural gas without carbon capture, gray hydrogen, you've just shifted the emissions upstream.
Right, the well-to-wheels issue.
Exactly. Then there's overall efficiency again. Even if the fuel cell is efficient, you lose energy making the hydrogen, compressing or liquefying it, transporting it. So the total energy efficiency from primary source to moving the car can sometimes be lower than for a battery EV charged directly from the grid, especially if that grid is increasingly renewable.
Okay, efficiency losses in the whole chain. What else?
Infrastructure, or the lack of it. This is a massive one. There are very, very few hydrogen refueling stations compared to gas stations or even EV chargers, mostly concentrated in California and the US.
The chicken and egg problem again. No cars because no stations because no cars.
Precisely. It's a huge barrier to adoption, and cost is another major factor. Green hydrogen production is still expensive, and the FCEVs themselves are currently pricey to manufacture, often more than comparable BEVs or gasoline cars.
High cost for the fuel in the car.
Yeah. And one last point, remember we said high energy density by weight? Well, hydrogen has low energy density by volume. Even compressed at 700 bar, it takes up a lot of space. So the tanks are bulky, which impacts vehicle design and interior space.
Okay, so significant hurdles. Production emissions, overall efficiency questions, lack of infrastructure, high costs, and bulky storage. That's quite a list.
It is. It explains a lot about the current situation.
Yeah, it really brings us to that million-dollar question, doesn't it? Given the tech has been around a while, why aren't there more hydrogen cars on the road? You've listed the cons, but let's connect the dots.
It really boils down to those barriers becoming major roadblocks. That infrastructure limitation is probably the biggest one right now for passenger cars. You mentioned the numbers, maybe 17,000 FCEVs in the US in 2022, almost all in California. That's tiny.
Because that's where the few stations are.
Exactly. You simply can't drive one conveniently in most places. That limits the market drastically. Then the high costs, both for the green hydrogen fuel and the vehicles themselves, make them a tough sell compared to alternatives.
Especially compared to battery electric cars, right? They seem to have really taken off.
Absolutely. That's the other huge factor. Competition, specifically from battery electric vehicles, BEVs. BEV technology has advanced incredibly rapidly. Battery costs have plummeted, ranges have increased, performance is great, and the charging network, while still needing growth, is vastly more extensive than hydrogen stations.
So BEVs kind of stole the momentum.
In many ways, yes. Nearly 3 million BEVs sold in the US versus those 17,000 FCEVs. It's just a different scale. BEVs got a head start in terms of market acceptance, infrastructure build-out, and benefiting from falling battery prices.
Are there technical hurdles still with hydrogen cars themselves?
Yes, things like improving the long-term durability and further reducing the cost of the fuel cell stacks are still ongoing challenges for really widespread, affordable mass production.
And what about, like, Government policies or market stuff?
That plays a role too. Subsidies and regulations have often, though not always, favored BEVs more directly. And the fact that most hydrogen today comes from fossil fuels makes it less appealing from a climate perspective for some policymakers and consumers, unless or until that shift to green hydrogen happens at scale. It dilutes the zero-emission promise.
So it's a combination. Infrastructure bottleneck, high costs, technical refinements needed, fierce competition from BEVs, and market policy factors all kind of working against rapid FCEV adoption right now.
That sums it up pretty well. It's a complex interplay of factors.
So given all that,
Mm.
what's the future look like? Is hydrogen for cars just a niche idea that won't take off, or could it still play a real part in transportation?
I think it's unlikely, certainly in the near to medium term, that hydrogen cars will, replace battery EVs for most personal transport. BEVs have too much momentum. But hydrogen definitely seems to have strong potential in areas where BEVs currently struggle. Think long-haul trucking, buses, maybe trains or ships, other heavy-duty transport.
Why there specifically?
Because for those applications, the longer range and crucially the fast refueling time that hydrogen offers are really significant advantages. Downtime costs money for commercial vehicles. Carrying massive heavy batteries needed for long-haul trucking is also a challenge for BEVs. Hydrogen's higher energy density by weight helps there.
So hydrogen could be the solution for the bigger stuff.
It looks like a very promising fit, yes. The advantages we talked about, zero emissions at the point of use, quick refueling, long range, they still hold true and are particularly valuable in those sectors. So the future probably looks more like hydrogen complementing battery electrics rather than replacing them.
A mixed fleet, depending on the job.
Exactly. Hydrogen finding its niche, especially in heavy transport, and potentially expanding if, and it's a big if, green hydrogen becomes much cheaper and more widely available, and if the infrastructure develops, may be driven initially by those commercial fleets.
Are companies still investing in it? Is there still interest?
Oh, definitely. There's ongoing research and development. You see pilot projects for hydrogen trucks and buses. And automakers haven't totally given up. You mentioned BMW planning to launch their iX5 hydrogen around 2028. That shows continued belief in the technology's potential, even if it's a longer-term play.
So not dead, but maybe focused on different areas than we initially thought.
That seems like a fair assessment of the current trajectory. The transportation landscape is definitely going to keep evolving.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. We've covered a lot of ground. It sounds like hydrogen offers this really exciting potential, right? Clean driving, quick fill-ups, good range.
Definitely appealing on paper.
But the reality is complicated. Getting clean hydrogen affordably, building the gas stations basically, and dealing with the high costs, plus the fact that battery EVs are improving so fast, those are major hurdles.
Significant challenges, absolutely.
So it looks less like hydrogen will dominate our driveways soon and more like it might find specific important roles, especially for bigger vehicles, running alongside BEVs.
That seems to be the consensus emerging, yes. A piece of the future puzzle, but perhaps not the whole picture for personal cars.
This has been incredibly illuminating, a real deep dive into hydrogen cars. Hopefully for everyone listening, you now have a much clearer sense of where things stand, the potential, yes, but also the very real roadblock.
So hope it's been helpful.
So here's something to leave you thinking about. We've talked about all these trade-offs, right? Clean fuel potential versus dirty production now. Fast refueling versus hardly any stations. Long range versus high costs. So considering all that, what specific advancements or maybe policy shifts do you think are the absolute most crucial if hydrogen is going to play a bigger part in how we all get around in the future? Something to mull over. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.